Hello, welcome to the South by Southwest 2021 session here. You're joining us for a workshop. It's called Behind the Lens with Rising Cinematographers. We actually have 3 cinematographers here that have films in the festival. So this is really exciting. We get to talk about their feature films and really get to the nitty gritty of how they did it and how they got here. It's going to be a lot of fun. My name is Snehal Patel. I'm the speaker and moderator for this workshop. I work for ZEISS Cinema Lenses, and we are a supplier of lenses for the cinema industry. This is for movies, for TV shows, music videos, commercials, and everything in between, all kinds of cinematography and video applications. And what we're going to do today is talk about cinematography. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to talk about really cool movies that you should probably watch during this festival. So pay attention, look up these cinematographers, look up their films. But first of all, let's do a quick introduction with everybody. I'm going to ask you your name, where you're located, and your favorite current camera. Hey, Lauren, how about we get started with you?
Sure. I'm based in Los Angeles, and my current favorite camera, I mean, it's the one that I shot Mabel My Beauty on. I love working with the Amira, unless I'm working on something that specifically, calls for anamorphic or, 2 times squeeze anyway. I just think ergonomically it's great for handheld. I'm familiar with the log C curve. I less subscribe to the idea that like, oh, it gives a certain look, and more I like the way that it enables me to work in a way that I like. So yeah.
Very cool. So the Alexa sensor, of course, is sported in the Mira, except it has like you said, a much more balanced body. So you seem to like
Right.
handheld work. That would make a lot of sense. Very cool. All right, for Farhad, let's go to you.
Yeah, my name is Farhad Behelvi. I live in Los Angeles. I think if someone asked me what my favorite camera was, I'd say it's the one in my hand. But if I had to pick, I'm format agnostic. If I had to pick one, I know the Alexa sensor the best. I've been using it for 10 years. So I know what it'll do in any situation I put into. I know when it's going to start to break down, and thankfully that doesn't happen until quite a far distance into the exposure. So it's just about familiarity. So if I shot with the new camera, I'd test it thoroughly and I'd kind of know how it lines up against the Alexa. But that's my go-to. If I had to pick up a camera today and shoot something, I would know exactly where things would fall on that sensor.
Very cool. Diego.
My name is Diego Guijarro, and I'm based out of Toronto. Likewise, I will have to go with the Alexa sensor. I was really excited. My favorite camera now actually will be the LF, just because the expansion to larger format has always been something that I just always been really, really, really interested. Because I started shooting stills, and the first camera that I started shooting kind of was a medium format, so getting that extra depth of field is just absolutely amazing. But same reason, I think the sensor is just, it always performs well, and it just gives you an easier canvas to start with than any of the other sensors that I have tested.
Very cool. All right, cool answers. And of course, all of you can obviously film with whatever is put in your hands, just like Farhad said.
Yeah.
But it's cool to know your tools and know what you like. So let's talk about your movies. Diego, we'll start with you. The film that you have in here, it's in the narrative competition. It's called Islands. Can you tell us a little bit about the project and how you came on board?
Yeah, so this is actually my first feature film ever. It came in, yeah.
Congrats.
It actually came in really, really last minute because the DP who was supposed to shoot it couldn't do it anymore. And I had happened to know the DP, and for whatever luck, I had shot a short film with Martin, who's the director, a couple of years before that. And it literally came in, like my agency sent me the script, had a meeting with him, I think that same afternoon, loved the script. And then
And what was that short film that you did a couple of years ago with them?
it was actually part of like the CFC, the Canadian Film Center. So it wasn't like, it's kind of like they put their students through like real set experiences type thing. And I can't remember if it was for the director's lab or something like that, but it was some sort of like program, and it was just random, the classic thing that you just kind of do, volunteer your time. And then it paid off really well, thankfully. The relationship with him was amazing. But Islands is part of the program of Telefilm micro budgets. Specifically, I think it's the program Talent to Watch. So basically, we had a really, really, really small budget. And I'm talking like, I don't know if it was something like 120,000 Canadian dollars for 22 days of shooting. So it was really, really tough. And there was very little prep. There was very little everything until we actually got into shooting. It's really cool because it's basically a portrait story that followed this, our main character Joshua, that the whole film is in Filipino too, which was quite a challenge too, to have to shoot something where you don't understand half of what people are saying. But 90% of the script happens in the family house, and it follows kind of like the Filipino tradition where like all their sons will take care of their families, and Joshua just struggles with the loss of his mom, and basically just unravel of like following this character having to deal with his confidence and how to take care of his dad on his own now. So it's really, really character based. It was a lot of fun. It was an amazing experience. More like none of the actors had any experience acting prior either. So there was like a lot of like, it was kind of like no budget actors who, have never been in front of a camera before, no prep time, everything happened in the same house. It was kind of like, it could have gone a lot worse than actually did. And it actually went really,
I mean,
really
you
well.
have a film in competition at South by Southwest.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
apparently
yeah.
went all right.
Yeah, but it was a challenge, and more being I have to say the biggest challenge was actually myself. And you get your first feature, and then you get an idea. You've been dreaming about shooting something long format for a while, and you start kind of like expecting what you want that to be. And then you find yourself with the limitations, you find yourself with the restrictions that you have with the budget and stuff like that. And the main struggle was actually fighting with me, and kind of like hoping that you can manage those expectations. And that was like, I mean, to me, it's been the best experience I had so far, just for those reasons, because it taught me what I had some ideas of what I thought cinematography was, and in this experience, it actually taught me what cinematography actually is.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a great experience to have. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations on your first feature.
Thank you.
Of many more. This was really nice to see you do that. And we could tell, like, by the framing that you're using in just some of the shots that we were allowed to see right now, you're experimenting, right? You're putting your characters like on the side in the corner. You're trying different things with whatever production design that you have. And I think that's the challenge of photography, is being able to find those moments and those angles. So, props to you for finishing that and getting to the finish line. Good job. Lauren, let's turn to you and talk about your film, which, I'm really happy to say already has distribution. So good for you. My Belle, My Beauty, right?
Yes.
Which is shot in France, about a polyamorous relationship. So how did you get involved in this project?
Yeah, I mean, the story is really kind of wonderful, actually. The director, Marian Hill, and I had gone to college together, and I was just starting to shoot, like, the first things I ever shot in my life when we were in school together, and she pulled focus, I think, on the second short I ever shot. She was 19, I was like 20 or 21. So yeah, that's how we met and started making movies together. And yeah, we just kind of kept in touch, even though I ended up being based in LA and she in New Orleans. And that's really where she pulled like a lot of this cast and crew from. But yeah, like we just kind of had this bond from college. I think, like I've said in like a couple other interviews, that, like we both had similar struggles, I think, with like the boys club of film school and feeling this kind of sense of isolation. And I think, realizing that we weren't alone in that, and a lot of the women in our program realizing that, kind of led us to like keep in touch with each other and support each other, and just find identification in each other. So that led us to say like, hey, let's collaborate. And when she sent me the script, I was just blown away. It was the kind of thing where like I could see it being a great movie just from like, reading all 80 something, almost 90 pages in like an hour. It was really easy to read, and it was easy to get excited about. So yeah, that's how I ended up shooting the film. And the whole experience of it was super magical. I think she was really intentional about like bringing together people from all parts of her life and all over the world to come together for this. So I was able to bring my first AC and my key grip from LA. The gaffer that I had, who was wonderful, was brought in from New Orleans. The producers were from New Orleans. Marion herself is based there, but like grew up between the UK, France, and the US. And we had actors from Switzerland, actors from New Orleans, and an actor from Tel Aviv. So it was just this like really kind of beautiful collection of people from all over the world. And yeah, I think from, you know, a creative approach, when I got there, I had a week of prep in the house that we shot most of the movie in. So, and I was living there. So, you know, it was great to just like wake up and watch the sunrise every day in the rooms that we'd be shooting in, and to wake up and like see how the porch looked every day at like 4 or 5 different times of day. So like, you know, living in the shooting location is tough for a lot of reasons when you actually get down to the shoot. But it just provided this amazing opportunity to like really ingrain myself in how to dance with the sun, especially because I had like a 3-person G&E crew, you know, and not a lot of gear. Like I think similar to what Diego was saying, it's like we were working with not a lot of money and we had 13 days to shoot this movie. And I was talking before I shot the film to Charlie Lieberman, who gave me a lot of great advice. And, you know, I think I was insecure about, you know, not having a lot of gear, thinking that cinematography is about strictly technical expertise or, you know, knowing how to work with big tools. And he just looked at me and he was like, knowing when the right time of day is and how to get there is still cinematography. So that was, you know, kind of the approach around daylight to this. And yeah, I couldn't have been more grateful to have the locations that we had. So yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks for that lowdown on what went on over there. It sounds really, really interesting. I just want to mention that you talked about Charlie Lieberman, ASC, and this is something that's really important for up and coming cinematographers, I think, is forming those relationships with the professionals in the industry. I know Diego actually got an award from the CSC, that's their version in the Canadian Society in Canada, and Lauren working with Charlie. Charlie does photography of like night skies, you know, at night. And he knows about going to the right place at the right time to find lighting. So it's so cool that you're able to get some, you know, information and feel better about your project by talking to someone that's really experienced. I think we encourage that always talk to people that have done this before, talk to people that are experts, because they're going to be able to bring stuff back to you. But your subject matter, okay, let's talk about that, because that's really interesting too. Did you use the production design to kind of help tell the story of the characters because you know this relationship that they have?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we looked a lot at like the textures of this house, and just kind of like the environment in general as something that like Fred is very comfortable in, and Birdie not so much. I mean, we talked a lot about, you know, the design and like the frames around Birdie, kind of just trying to emphasize the fact that like she's a little bit of an outsider, and that's kind of how she, you know, that's how she is in this story. And the reason that Fred says, you know, maybe let's bring Lane back into the equation is that she ignites something in Birdie that kind of hasn't been the same since Lane left the relationship. And so I think the movie kind of really centers around this idea that like, you know, polyamory addresses the idea that you can enjoy different qualities in different people, and that you know, it brings out the possibilities of, you know, not just staking your personality and like your relationship with one person. And so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I think it's less about like, you know, that we had a really prescribed visual language for you know, framing Birdie in short-sighted frames expresses that, you know, she feels left out of things. And it was more about like trying to respond to performance and trying to like use the handheld format, because that's something that Marion is really drawn to, in a way that could pick up like the little details of physicality, in the way that like if the actor turns their head just a little bit in a certain direction on a certain line, it's like I really tried to focus on movement and less on like super precise composition or super precise color rendition or anything like that, you know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the relationship is messy, so of course, if the photography speaks to that, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be this like super crisp,
pretty, yeah.
super precise thing.
Absolutely. Farhad, let's talk about your feature film. This one's called Women is Losers. It has a little interesting title. It's a period piece set in San Francisco. I think either 60s or 70s. I'm not quite clear because it depends on the article that you read. But it's set in the 60s or 70s. It's about a Latino woman that is basically, you know, fighting her way up the ranks to be able to buy some property and establish herself in a time period where that was very, very difficult to do. It's a very interesting project. It looks like it came from Tribeca Institute, was where it started. How did you get involved in this project?
Yeah, it's a really interesting story. You know, the film, I was introduced to the director, Lisette, by some common friends. And at that time, she was working on a short film version of this story. And we did that together about 5 years ago. And we got really close in the process of making that story. I think, you know, again, it's drawn from some experiences that she's seen in her extended family. And we lived together in her childhood home. And, you know, similar to what Lauren was saying, you know, we filmed in those real spaces and could really, for the short version, really soak up, you know, all the artifacts that a life lived leaves behind and put those into sort of like the visual storytelling. And she always wanted to translate it to a feature-length project. And so what happened was that we had a really extended prep. You know, I think we prepped for about 2 years on and off between jobs and so on, while she was writing the film and then sort of putting the project on its feet. We had a long extended prep where we could really dig into the stories behind the scenes and really what constituted the character and how she wanted to take us on this journey with the protagonist, Selena. And you know, when the film finally got greenlit, we had, I think, 2 weeks of prep and then we were shooting. So it was really thankful. I was thankful that we had such an intense and extended director's prep, because then, you know, the locations fell into place real quick and we could pivot a lot of the challenges to our advantage because we knew where the story was headed, you know. I think the biggest factor for us visually was to make sure that we portrayed Selena as a hero, you know, the hero of her own story, someone who's taking charge of her own destiny. And as you said, when you were describing the film, it's set in the 60s and the 70s, so the latter half of the 60s and the first half of the 70s. And it was a time, I think, when as a person of color, as an immigrant, as a woman, I think Selena, the character's identity, was very much tied to other people in her life, whether it was her father, whether it was, you know, the father of her child, whether it was, you know, all these sort of associative identities. And I think Lisette, in writing the film, wanted to portray Selena as someone who was trying to claim that for herself. So I remember really clearly we were doing a lens test in New York, and we looked at maybe a dozen different kinds of lenses. And the rental guy, you know, the person at the rental house, put one anamorphic on the bench, and we threw it up at the end of the day, and immediately Lisette was like, wow, she looks like a hero now. And not to say that, you know, there's some intrinsic quality in anamorphics. I mean, we could have done that spherically, but it just unlocked this sort of kernel of what a visual idea was. You know, we wanted her to be a hero. And I think that scene in the final film, you know, the portraitures intended to be sort of giving her sort of presence in the frame, a certain sense of plantedness and gravity. And we did end up filming anamorphic, which I think helped tell that story. But it was really more about how the process of sort of prepping and testing and looking at things together with the director, it unlocked something that then kind of became the cornerstone of our visual language. And, you know, because there are very real people in her life and now in my life by extension, that the film represents, I think we were really careful to honor those lived experiences without reducing them down to a plot point or like a dramatic beat. I think there's sometimes a tendency, as a cinematographer, I know I'm guilty of this, of being efficient in your storytelling where, certain ideas are reduced down to like, a punctuation mark or something like this. And actually those are lives, those are people's experiences. And so we really wanted to, without sanitizing the story or sort of romanticizing her struggle, present it in a way that showed, the good and the bad. She's an immigrant, she's a woman, she's a single mom, but there's a lot of joy in her life, there's a lot of pain in her life, and there's a lot of complicated relationships, like with her mother, with her, the father of her child. And it was never a question of really like reducing her down to this heroic woman who navigates a period of time. It was about, this is a real person, just like, anyone else, and they have their weaknesses and follies and so on. And we had only a few weeks to shoot the movie. I think we filmed in 20 days or something, all on location in San Francisco. So very much like Diego and Lauren, it was a lot of seat of our pants stuff. We kept our camera package really, really nimble. And we wanted to stay away from handheld. We'd had this conversation where, I love handheld. And I think sometimes there's sort of like a sense that when you finish a handheld shot, you feel really good. There's a lot of like dopamine. And I often struggle with like, is that in the movie or is that just me? Because I had a workout for the last like 10 minutes, So we ended up doing this thing where we didn't have enough time to lay down dolly track and plan very precise moves. So we ended up living on a gimbal for a lot of the movie and trying at times to have a sort of stillness where the audience could take a breath, and then at times sort of flowing with Selena as she was navigating those spaces. So I think the gimbal and we used the Alexa Mini, so the camera was really small, and I think that really helped what similar to what Lauren was saying, adapt to performances as they evolved and respond, but also have sort of like a poetry to the visuals that we felt was could modulate kind of with how the scenes were playing out, and the lighting was very minimal. We had some friends, many of these movies, these independent movies are made with friendships, and we got some friends in San Francisco to help us with the equipment. Little Giant was the rental house, and they really came through. They gave us some light mats and so on, and if you zoom out the frame like 10%, you'll see like light mats everywhere on the ceiling and on the walls. But a lot of it was about taking light away from those locations, and really, really kind of like finding the light that told the story, whether it was in the time of day or whether it was the absence of light or whether it was something kind of gross looking like a kitchen fluorescent, because I think often our tendency also is to either fetishize those things like cyan fluorescence or something and then use them for their aesthetic quality, or to be kind of seduced by this sense of beauty, which is, soft window light that falls off really dramatically and then creates contrast. And I think, often life doesn't look like that. Life can be ugly in its lighting. And I think there's kind of like a poignancy to those spaces as well.
No, absolutely. Well put. Well put. It's sometimes it's the absence of light or how you control it, really, which speaks to the photography. Before I jump ahead to more technical questions, Diego, Farhad just mentioned his camera package. Could you tell us quickly what you were using? Diego, can you hear me?
I think we had you on mute, Diego.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was unmuted. That was me. Diego, go ahead. You're muted. Could you tell us about the camera package? You're still muted. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
We ended up shooting on a Mini as well, and we had a set of Cook S4s. We didn't have like I wish I could go and tell you that we had like tons of lenses to test to which ones were the right for the story and so on, but our choices were really limited by what people could actually give us. And we did few tests on a few sets, and I ended up landing on the Cooks just because it had that in between. I think we tested the ultra primes and the super speeds and the S4s. I'm really sorry for doing this on a size conversation.
Oh no,
but
not at all. It's your choice. You're the artist. You get to choose whatever paintbrush
it
you
was
want.
just it was just the in between, that kind of like really sharp look of the ultra primes and that really soft, more magical that the super speeds have, and like that the Cooks, we found that it had that balance in between sharpness and softness, and how it still maintained like the bokeh equal throughout the whole set. And there was a few elements that came under account. But I mean, again, I wish I had like 15 set of lenses to try and find the right ones, but unfortunately we're really limited by our budget.
No, you know, you're always going to have that issue. By the
Yeah.
way. It doesn't ever go away. It doesn't matter if you make a $300 million picture. They're still going to yell at you about budgets. Lauren, what did you use? I just want to confirm, did you use the Mira for this package?
Yes, yeah, we shot on an Amira and the Panavision ZEISS Ultra Speeds. Yeah, I mean, for me personally, like similar to Diego, it wasn't like we had like every set of lenses as options, but we were super lucky to get, you know, a really generous offer from Panavision Marseille. And among the lenses that they had available, I think it was more about like, you know, the fact that the Ultra Speeds are not like crazy wacky lenses, and you know, Marion definitely wanted the film to feel like grounded, as like it's a modern movie. It's not like a highly stylized like you know, the cinematography is not loud, you know. So I felt like those you know, really came down to, yeah, the fact that they are not super crazy lenses, and the fact that they have a couple of focal lengths that are not typical in a lot of families of lenses, especially the 29mm. You don't see in every family of lenses. And even though that one's like a little heavier than the others, we ended up shooting a lot of the film on it. I just like that perspective paired with the Super 35 sensor, the way that it incentivizes me to get close with the actors, but not in a way that is like, you know, super distorting their faces or anything. So yeah, that was a big choice with lenses, and paired them with Glimmer Glass 1, which to my mind is a nice diffusion for like really blooming highlights without lifting the black level a ton. And I just, you know, got to test it with the lenses very briefly at our prep and thought like, okay, this is gonna work.
Nice. Did any either of you guys use filters as well for your projects?
I didn't use. I don't tend to use filters. It's just something that I don't know. It's just I like whatever the glass gives you without having to push too much on the stylization beyond whatever the glass makes. So I don't tend to use filters, and on this one I didn't use at all.
Farhad?
Yeah, no filtration. I don't have sort of like a dogmatic problem with filters, but I, similar to Diego, don't use them very often unless it's for a heavy kind of look. We shot on the Atlas Orion anamorphics, and
Which is
one of the things
kind of like having a filter in a lens.
exactly that, you know, and one of the reasons we chose those lenses was because it you know, changes so much the character of the lens depending on the stop.
Yes.
So there are some sequences where it's like, you know, a lot further open, and the lens starts to fall apart in a way that I think helps tell the story. And then there are other places where the lens, I think, gets out of the way because it's a little cleaner and a little deeper of a stop.
Yeah, absolutely. And all three of you talked about lighting, right? Which is really some of the most difficult things especially when you have a lower budget project like you all had. So, you know, aside from asking for favors, how do you plan? Like, do you have some go-tos that you're just like, look, if it's a minimal package, I need at least this, or I'm going to need this kind of LED to do my job. Like, is there any go-to stuff in your kit? We could start with Lauren and go to Diego, then Farhan.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it totally depends, of course, on like, you know, the shooting scenario. I try to look at a script and think, okay, is this mostly day exterior? Is it mostly night interior? I mean, for me, I feel like the sky panel, I'm like you know, outing myself as like a young filmmaker here, but I'm super dependent on sky panels. I think I'm just used to them in terms of their flexibility. Even if I'm not using them for RGB even, I know that like my gaffer will always know how to work with them. I like how punchy they are, how flexible they are, the fact that they can be battery powered and we can take them to sort of remote locations. Yeah, I think that that's a great tool pretty much for anything except for like day exteriors, obviously. And this is less of like, I don't know, a go-to tool that I use all the time, but it's one that we used on Mabel is just like something that my key grip and I called the sky ground bounce. And all we did was like stretch a light blue bed sheet on the top of like any given frame and like a tan one at the bottom, just to give something that wasn't like you know, a perfectly white bounce, because especially in this film, you know, we're surrounded by like farmland and things like that. But generally in movies, when you're shooting day exteriors, like when do you ever have people surrounded only by white sources of light? You know, you don't. So that was just kind of like a simple trick and a tool that we carried for all of that that I, you know, have started doing on other projects too.
Diego?
I mean, I don't have a go-to, but always, as a rule, since I started and having conversation with a lot of DPs, they always recommend, and I found that it's really true, is always have whatever is hard. Any sort of like, if the minimum you can have is always bring hard lighting, you can always soften it, you can always shape it, you can always do many things with it. So it's true that like nowadays it's like tools that I absolutely love. And Farhad, you show the usage, but it's light mats. I find is some of the best creations for Tyson smaller space. But if I have to choose what to bring, I'll always have something like hard and big, and then always from there start cutting down and stuff like that. That's what I would say is always. And lately, mirror boxes for everything, for adding distance to those hard lights to 1,000. I realize how important actually mirror boxes have become in absolutely everything that I do.
Farhad?
On this project, we ended up with a lot of light mats, and they were invaluable because we were in small San Francisco, you know, city locations, and so they're easy to tack to the wall or things like that, arm out over someone. I don't have a go-to, you know. I think it really does depend on what you're trying to create, and there's this idea that how much of the movie exists on set and how much of the movie only exists like in the emulsion or like in the sensor when everything is put together, and different directors like a different balance of that, and different actors like a different balance of that. And sometimes you have to just keep the lights outside and the set, you walk into the set and it looks like the movie, and you know, you can live that, you can breathe and inhabit that space and capture what happens there. And then there are other things where the lighting is a little more technical and precise, and you know, you, like I said, on this movie, you zoom out 10% and you see it falls apart because you see all the flags and diffusions and things like that. So I think for me, it's more about, you know, what is the intent to create, you know, how are we serving up this space and welcoming the actors into it, and that sort of takes precedence over the tools themselves. I also think that the, you know, the best actors, and we had some really good ones on this movie, they tend to light themselves, and not in the sense that they know that they have to stand by the window, but in a sense that I think that their performance, if it's informed by the same sort of underlying ideas that the cinematography is informed by, it there's a cohesion there where like you're not fighting an element of the location or the script to light them. Like, you know, it works together. And you know, one of the things I was really thankful for on this film, even though it was so low budget, was that we had a wonderful production designer, and you know, Susie Allegria, based out of the Bay Area, and you know, she's a pro. She's been doing this for a while, and it was such a treat for me to have her present these spaces that had kind of lighting opportunities built into them, that then I didn't have to bring in as an artificial sort of idea, but the actors saw it and they were like, you know, it was very natural to their blocking to go open the blinds or turn on a lamp or sit by something that, and you know, the way she had laid everything out was very organic. And I agree totally with Diego. Like if I was walking into a situation where I didn't, like a documentary or something, which I also shoot, and I didn't know the locations and I didn't know what was going to happen, a hard light yeah, like I love Licos, the ellipsoidal spot reflectors. And I carry those all the time because you can bounce them into a cove guard and create a nice soft light. You can go direct with them. You can really control them quickly. So yeah, hard light it's kind of old fashioned, I think. Hard light and tungsten. I love tungsten. If I have the power for it, like I think it looks the most beautiful. It's the most beautiful light in the world, and maybe except for sunlight. And I light a lot of mixed skin tones because I grew up in India, and as I'm sure you're aware, like we have a whole rainbow of skin tones even just in India, and then the stories that I tell here tend to be immigrant stories, and often in the same scene you'll have several different kinds of skin. And I found that LEDs, though I depend on them just for practicality, I find that they catch you out sometimes when you have two different skin people in the same scene. Like it'll really work for one side, and then you'll be in trouble on the other side. So I think you can get caught up in all that, those are minutiae that you can get worried about. But yeah, you start with the space and the story, and then the rest kind of unfolds, I think.
Yeah, no, it's good to have that technical knowledge so that you can apply it, especially when you're on the go and you have to figure out things fast. You're absolutely right about LED. I mean, it doesn't even come close to exciting the full spectrum of colors that tungsten light or actual daylight does. And in fact, one of the worst lights is HMIs. They have a very small spectrum of reflection altogether. So yeah, these are real challenges in the real world. Yes, LEDs save money. Yes, they're lightweight. Yes, you can tape them on this wall right here and it'll light you. But the quality of the light, of course, will never match some of the hard lights that you guys were talking about. So very interesting.
To make a comment on that, it's really funny because nowadays you have the pricing of, you're going to get a sky panel, which will cost you whatever is much, which if I filled up a truck with tungsten lighting, it's just going to cost you to power it. So
yes,
it becomes in that thing that you have that conversation with producers being like, no, I understand like this is much more expensive to power, but it's also going to cost you like 1/10 of the price of what we're paying for that sky panel. So it's just always finding that like fighting spirit, I guess, to explain it.
That's absolutely true. I mean, it's always a balance of trying to figure out what's going to work and then budget and everything and time. But it's good to have that knowledge of, like you said, Diego, like, well, I could just have a truckload of tungsten lamps and you just need a Jenny then, that's all it is. It's not a big deal. We've done it. We've done it for 100 years. We could keep doing that. So yeah, no, absolutely. Now, let's turn to the modern day, because all three of you are working cinematographers, right? And you're still trying to find work and work during the pandemic. How has this pandemic, this crazy thing that's not allowing us to see each other at South by Southwest, which I'm really upset about because I love watching your films in the theaters. I really enjoy meeting all of you in person, and that's what the industry is about and the community is about, the filmmaking community. We got to meet each other and work with each other. How is it for you now? Like what's changed, and what do you see for the near future? Farhad, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, the world is virtually unrecognizable from a year ago. We're coming up on sort of the American anniversary of COVID, and yeah, I mean, it's been an awful year, I think, for all of us collectively. And I mean, I'm so fortunate that my worry is focused on my work and not my health and the health of those around me. That having said, I think I miss the movie theater. Like, it hurts my heart that we don't get to watch these movies in the theater, because there's something so beautiful about being with other people that love movies in the same room and watching images on a screen. But I think the more time that, now it's been a year, the more time that goes by, I think that, there's a new energy now, and the energy doesn't reside in that theater. It resides in us engaging with each other. So I think, virtual festivals and even just, we have a little film club with my wife and a few friends of ours, and it's the same energy, because it's us that bring that joy and connectiveness and recognition of each other's experiences and reactions to the films, and it's not about the room. So on the watching side, I think we're adapting and we're kind of bringing that same communal aspect to watching things virtually and streaming and home. On the production side, so much of, for me, being a cinematographer is about communicating, and for a lot of that communication is nonverbal. Like, if you have your eye to the viewfinder, like, sometimes your other eye sees what the director's reaction might be, or you glance over, if you have another operator or someone, you give them a little look and they know that it means that something is going to happen. Or there's so much nonverbal stuff, and even with the actors, that I think all these new protocols, like being masked and with a shield and distanced and so on, I think it's taken a toll on that. I've had to kind of learn a new vocabulary to communicate with crew. I did a job recently where the director was in New York, and I think the agency was in Australia, and we were shooting in LA. And she was like you are now in my ear, and she had a remote feed, and we never met in person the whole job. And I mean, it was perfectly fine, but we needed to kind of figure out a new way of trusting each other and respecting each other, and also just having that sense of alignment that is so natural when you're on set looking at the same image. When you're virtual, you just have to work a little bit harder for it. But the fact that our work is inherently sort of like mechanical, technological, films, there's an element of technology inherent in the medium. I think we're going to adapt, and I think some beautiful stuff has happened in the last year that I think not only overcomes the challenges posed by COVID, but sort of it embraces them and produces content that I think wouldn't have existed in the world prior to COVID. So I think I'm really optimistic about things. There was the book, Walter Murch's book, In the Blink of an Eye, about film editing. He used to talk about how he put like a little paper cutout heads so that the Steinbeck monitor or whatever looked like the scale reference of like what people in the theater would be to the little monitor. I think now that no longer exists. Like, I don't compose differently for episodic than for cinematic work. I think that idea that like film is about wide shots and TV is about close-ups, like I think all that has gone out the window. You have commercials that look right in, like they would be at home in a movie theater, and you have episodic work that looks like right at home on a big IMAX screen. So I think it's about sort of embracing the fact that people are allowing us to do this kind of work, and just telling stories using all the tools at our disposal.
Very well said, Farhad. Very well said. Diego, what are your thoughts on current working conditions?
Well, I don't know. I've gone to the movies a lot through this pandemic, and it actually has been the best time because movies in Madrid are still open, like the theaters are open here in Malta too, and there's nobody. You just go, it's just you, there's another couple of people. So in that sense, it's been like I've been watching a lot of movies lately. But it's true, it's what Farhad said. It's like at the end of the day, like the sense of community is what you miss the most, is just going to theater with friends, with family, whatever it is, and being able to share the experiences more than the film itself. In the production level, like to me, there's a certain level of connection with film crews, and there's like probably what Farhad mentioned too, the level of like trust and all these things that we have that I personally miss a lot. And I think like you not being able to be as close as you can with your crew members and stuff, even like specific little things like having lunch 2 meters apart is a massive thing for me, because I love people. And I think like, when we work in an industry where we are super privileged, that if we are able to put up what we put up with, is just because we love it. Not being able to share that experience to the maximum and having these kind of limitations limit that extent is tough. It's true that it's open avenues for newer ideas and newer content, and it's every time that something like this happens, then something new comes up, and there is no progress unless you get, unfortunately, sometimes in this kind of situation, and as Farhad said, like there's some work that is coming out of this situation that is absolutely stunning. There's some stories of again, like we are the privileged people that we get to tell the stories, but there's a lot of people living certain stories that are quite incredible, and they are challenging, and some of them are sad, and some of them are really good. And then hopefully we will inherit all these emotions that the whole world is going through, to them being able to continue telling these stories. But I like movie theaters. I like the experience of the cinema. That's what I personally like. So in that sense, I definitely feels like you're missing something. Something is just not quite there. But hoping that things will go back to a better normal, not quite like the old normal, but a better normal, and being able to say that we have been able to adapt to something better.
Good points there, Diego. Very nice. Lauren, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, you know, what we're all sharing in is this loss of like the collective audience experience. It's just, it is something, like you said, Farhad, that like hurts my heart when I'm watching something that you don't get to feel the emotions kind of that are palpable in the air of people around you. And that's, of course, what we all love about the theatrical setting. But, you know, what I hope that, remains after things go back to like a new normal or whatever is that like digital access or internet access to films from festivals will still be an option, because I love the fact that like my parents got to see Mabel, you know, and like friends and family got to see it who otherwise never would have been able to go to Sundance. And so, you know, what's so exciting about festivals is the opportunity to share your work, and the fact that we've gotten that out of this, you know, otherwise horrific period in history is like a nice thing that I hope remains. And I like, Farhad, what you said about how, of course, like our work is so based in communication, and the physical distance, the distance that's created by like a director or a client not being on set is really hard. But I hope that the end result is that like it will be like we've been running with weights on. And so when those barriers to communication are no longer there, we'll just be even better at the communication aspect of our jobs. So, you know, that's kind of my thought on it. And just from like an on-set perspective, I have yet to find like a mask and a face shield thing that doesn't like completely fog up my face when I'm trying to look in the viewfinder. I hate that. I hope it ends soon. But just from like, yeah, just a purely physical logistical thing that I've not been able to, you know, work my way around. From a positive side, I think of, you know, the technical aspect of filmmaking in COVID. I myself have never done anything like the Errol Morris and Terratron setup, and I do shoot some documentary. And, you know, when I had a situation where like a director wanted a direct to camera thing, but she couldn't be there, that forced me to look into solutions of like, okay, well, how can we do this on Zoom? And my AC and I ended up putting like a teleprompter set up in front of the lens, but just instead of text in the teleprompter, it was her face on Zoom. So, you know, that was a nice like new skill that I got to learn. I don't know. I have a lot of mixed feelings that are like hard to articulate, but that's where I'm at.
Well, you know, thank you for sharing what you did, because that's really important for people to understand that we're always just trying to innovate. So we have to adapt. And this solution that you're talking about, I've heard it from 5 different sources since the pandemic started, of trying to play around and make systems work. I mean, you're talking about people that every day they were using, you know, high-end Venice Alexa Monstro on set, and now they got to deal with sending an iPhone through the mail to capture the similar type of content. We get it. It's crazy out there, and we wish you the best, and we want you to work, you know, the right way. So finishing up, we're going to quickly, and you guys answer really just 1-minute answers. For the next round of up-and-coming cinematographers, what is your quick advice now that you're here at South by Southwest with your feature films and your teams? What would your advice be for the young people? We'll go backwards this time. We'll go from Lauren, Diego to Farhad.
I would say spend as much time with the director as possible. Always. I think like that's so much more important than, you know, everything else has to stem from there. Your technical plan has to stem from there. Your ideas about color, composition, your approach, even, you know, logistically, and deciding what tools are important. And, you know, just getting like aligned with their mind and learning what they want to prioritize. It's like a relationship, you know, it is a relationship. So yeah, just putting as much quality time into that as possible is so important.
I will say, learn to be happy with yourself when you are not working. Like, aside from whatever it is, the time that you spend shooting and how much we already love what we do, I think experiencing and seeing other things, especially out of film, reading, hiking, whatever it is that you're doing, like just be. You cannot bring the 100% of yourself if you're burning out of only doing what you do. So I would say figure out a way to be as happy and as you can outside of film, and then do whatever you want to do when you are doing film.
Good advice. Farhad?
Yeah, I think both of those are excellent things, Diego and Lauren. And I just add to it by saying that I think if you're starting out, or if you're kind of any point in your journey, really, I think just resist the temptation to judge things, whether it's a script, a person, or even when you're doing your own kind of personal work, like don't judge the light, like just sit with it for a second before deciding, is it soft or hard or warm or cool, and like, just study it for a minute and study the scene before, I think we're so quick to make a decision and then label something and then stop thinking about it because we've encapsulated it in a box. And not just in film, but in our lives. And just don't do that. Take a moment, give the thing the respect it deserves, whether it's a line on the page or it's a person who's bringing to you their story, and sit with it and consider it, and then be honest about your reaction to it. Don't think that you're expected to like the light just because it's like a beautiful sunrise or something. Like maybe what appeals to you is like top down noon light. Like there's no problem, and there's no shame in those things. And leverage them, leverage your honesty to tell the story. And I think the stories that move me the most are the ones that I feel are sincere and earnest, and told without any irony or sort of sarcasm, or where I feel that the storyteller is putting their heart on their sleeve and is not keeping themselves at arm's length from the content. So like try to engage with the story in a sincere way.
That was really top-notch advice from 3 very talented cinematographers. We want to thank you all for joining us today during this session. You were with us at South by Southwest at the Behind the Lens Rising Cinematographers session. If you enjoyed this workshop, please give your feedback. South by Southwest would love to hear about it. We really enjoy doing these workshops. We've been doing workshops for years at South by Southwest. ZEISS is a proud sponsor. But please check out these films. It's really important that you watch them because that's what they're there for. That's why we have a film festival. So just to recap, Diego's film that he was a cinematographer for was called Islands, and that's in the narrative competition. Farhad, his film Women is Losers that he was a cinematographer for is also in the narrative feature competition. And Lauren Gutierrez, who did My Belle, My Beauty, already got distribution and is in the festival favorites category. So watch that as well. Of course, there's a reason why I got distribution, so you should go see it. But not just that, this is why we're here, is to make sure that we're sharing the art and people are watching, having this forum to be able to watch these films and talk about them. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation that we had. The cinematographers we had today are really talented and top-notch, but not just that, they were very open with you and really gave their own perspectives. And I think we should take that to heart and thank them. So thank you all, cinematographers, congratulations for being in the festival. And of course, thank you so much for doing the session with us. Take care, everyone. Have a great festival. Enjoy the rest of the sessions, the movies, the parties, whatever else you can be a part of. Just enjoy the week. And we'll do it virtually this year, but next year we'll see you there in Austin, Texas. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.